Hi, I'm Pepper Cory and I'm here for Studioe Fabrics, and we're talking about English paper piecing, also called EPP, just to make it a little bit shorter. And in a previous video I talked about basting, which is taking long stitches, usually in white thread, and lapping over larger hexagons of fabric over paper patterns. And it produces very nice, neat little pieces like this. And we are going to arrange those around a center. A block like this with 6 hexagons around it is called a rosette. Now, if we're going to actually do the basting, you need to have your white thread, your basting thread. I'm going to put on my glasses for a moment. And you need to find the grain of the fabric. What's the grain? The grain is the up and down, the vertical and the horizontal weave of the fabric. Because now I'm going to take one of the paper pieces and lay them down. And see, this is the larger hexagon that I referred to in the previous video where I added a 1/2 inch around my shape. Lay your hexagon down so that it aligns with the grain right here, and lap over that first hem. Go ahead and just do it with your fingers. I don't pin it, I just do it with my fingers. Now this is an embroidery needle and it's sharp. Now notice there's 2 kinds of embroidery needles. There's something called a tapestry needle, which has a blunt point on it. It's used with canvas. And there's a crewel embroidery needle. We want the crewel needle because it's going to go through the fabric, it's going to go through the paper. So I start sewing. I'm going to lay this here and I hope that you can see it. I've taken 1 stitch. Yes, it's a big knot. Who cares? It's all going to come out. And I take 1 more stitch like that. And then I turn the hexagon. And this time, lap down the hem of fabric. I guess I'd call it a hem or the seam. And you see, it looks neat on the front and then on the back. And I take a stitch that goes across that fold. It looks neat on the front. The fabric is folded over and you can see a nice sharp corner. This is a 60-degree angle, and that's what we want. So this hexagon here is going to look like this one when it's done. The paper on the back, you can see the knots, big stitches, but nice and neat on the front and ready to be sewn together. I'm going to set down this one, which is only half basted at this point, but talk to you now about the second kind of sewing, and that's how do you fasten the hexagons together to make this lovely little shape called a rosette. Looks like a big flower, doesn't it? So this time I will change the color of the thread. I'm no longer using white. Now for me, I'm doing reds and oranges, and they're going to be sewn onto yellow. So definitely go through your threads and audition them. And try to find something that blends with both the color of your center hexagon and your prints that you're putting around the edge. Now let's turn it over because all the work happens from this side. Now the needle that I've chosen to work with is not the embroidery needle that I did basting with. This is long and thin, and it's called a milliner's needle, or sometimes called a straw. And it's going to take little tiny stitches. Can you see how small the stitches are as they join here? Don't even try to count how many there are that fasten these hexagons together. I take a little tiny stitch. It gets just a nip of the fabric of this hexagon and this one, and come back right next to it. I'm going to hold this up, I hope so you can see it better. Take another one right next to it and do it tightly. Not you don't have to tug after everyone, but you do want to do it tight with a lot of stitches. Can you do too many stitches? Nah, probably not. So here's what I'm sewing on. And I'm using this orange thread, which really blends nicely. The print is orange and red, and the center hexagon is yellow. But when you take tiny stitches, turn it over, you can't see them on the front. And that's why a blending color of thread is a really good idea. By the way, this is a 60 weight Presencia cotton thread. It's thin but very strong. Now, if this is starting to look familiar, if you're a traditional quilt maker, I'm sure you've heard of Grandmother's Flower Garden. And Grandmother's Flower Garden is a beloved pattern. Most people here in the U.S. piece it without paper pieces. But imagine this. If you had these beautiful, already cut hexagons, you could go through and do some real fancy stuff. Ah, look at that. We could really make this. Oh, you see, you could take modern prints and update them. Of course, these hexagons are bigger because they're cut larger as the fabric. So you could do something like that and use some of your wild fabrics. Boop. If I turn this one around here, now it looks like the little stems are all coming out of the center. So you get these secondary designs, and sometimes you don't know where they come from until the hexagons are cut. This is why it's really, really fun. So this one's going to come off, and it's going to go on to the center, and this one, and that. Oh boy. Now, that looks super contemporary. So we have just updated Grandmother's Flower Garden using a very old technique, paper pieces, and made it a modern looking block. I love this, and I'm going to continue doing it. But this will be portable work. I don't need my sewing machine for this. I can literally stick them in my pocket and take them with me. That's good for lunch hour, or you're waiting for the kids, or you're in the doctor's office and he's late again. And so you're working on your English paper piecing. And one day, after you've made hundreds of these, you'll have a quilt.